The father of evolution is Charles Darwin. He discovered or proposed the theory of what? Of, more specific, what type of theory of natural selection. He wrote a book. You can add that, called The Origin of Species, because that comes up a lot sometimes. Origin of Species. Just write it. Origin of Species. Where did he do most of his studies on? Galapagos Islands, and he got there through the USS or HMSS Beagle, yes, which is a boat. Refresher of what we're doing. So we started off with an explanation of ecosystem again, or a review of what ecosystems are. We talked about diversity within the ecosystem. We talked about necessary components of an ecosystem, the difference between a habitat and a niche, and then we went into relationships of organisms within the ecosystem. And now we're going to focus on the changes that occur within a species that leads to evolution of a population, okay? So we're going to learn about different things that happen in your environment or within organisms' reach of resources that could lead to the evolution of the population, okay? Because remember we said yesterday, genetics mutate, species, fill in the blanks, change, populations evolve. Okay, I'm gonna say that 100 times today. In some capacity, I'm gonna make that statement. Okay, so this particular vocabulary word, I'm gonna call it that, which describes a possibility of something that can happen to species within a population that could lead to evolution of a specific population. It's called reproductive isolation. The word says it all. What does that mean? What?
That they need to isolate.
No, not need to. So in other words, this impact can lead to species change and evolution of a population. What is happening in reproductive isolation? So it could be. So something's happening where they're losing the opportunity to mate with other species and produce offspring, which can obviously lead to a change in the type of species, right? Because maybe specific genes will be favored or be passed on, and they can result, or it can happen based on some of these reasons, like geography, could be behavior. I simply do not like certain things you do, so I'm not going to mate with you. I mean, it could be that much. Yeah. Genetics, it could be a lot of things, but those are called barriers or reasons for why some species are isolated from each other in reproduction. So, and I'm going to say this, every single term that we cover today, every scenario is intertwined or can be related with another. So look, we said geography can lead to reproductive isolation, yes? And geography can lead to evolution, okay, of a specific population. It leads to a change in a species. Geography, or being geographically isolated, means what? They're separated. Somehow there's some kind of barrier, okay, that's causing a separation between species, and it'll lead to a change within that species and evolution of a new population, right? Like, there's so many examples. There's so many. And you're going to see that pictures that I'm going to bring up. So this particular lizard here, let's say this is the original. They were separated by this valley, and you see the changes in the traits of. So if you're going to use this diagram to describe geographical isolation, I'm just going to answer this question. You have a population of lizards, and you only see one, so you really can't say a population, but you should, because this can only happen where there is a population, right? And then somehow there's a barrier, such as, in this case, Central Valley, and I could read on and on because I don't really know what's going on there. But a population of lizards evolved on one side of the island, or one side of the barrier that's primarily blue, and on the other side that's spotted orange with, I don't know, right? Is that good? Okay. All right. And if I was to ask, can these be reproductively isolated? Yes, because they're not together, right? They don't have access to each other. So not having access to each other can be reproductive isolation. All right, so speciation, and I'm going to change this statement because it says evolution of a new biological species. We're going to say the species change led to evolution of the population. Let's change it to so we could be consistent. Species change led to evolution of the population. But speciation basically means that you have a new species arise, hence evolution of a new population, right? How does this happen? It can happen. What is this picture showing right here? Right here. Geographical isolation. So allopatric and peripatric are geographical isolation. You might be wondering, where do you see that? Right here. This is an example of peripatric, and you see they've been geographically isolated. Yes? Now, sympatric and parapatric is any type of isolation, speciation other than geography. I want to see if I'm challenging you to see if you could give me a scenario that can describe speciation of a type other than geographical. I'm going to pause for you to think about that. Peripatric has the letter E in it, which is the first letter of the word earth, and think of geography as an impact. And then obviously you have to learn that allopatric is geographical too. All right, so again, give me an example of, yes.
Maybe like preferences.
Keep going.
Like the thing that you said with the smell,
That attracts them to a specific
species to mate with.
Okay.
So that way they're not like mating with the other species.
And they're
Kind of
choosing
like
one over the other.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was gonna say maybe if there's like a mutation and like they deviate away from that mutation and they prefer to mate with the ones that look more like them.
Totally. And it doesn't have to involve mating, right? It doesn't have to be related to mating. Look at this picture. Who can describe this? Or give me your example and then I'll ask that question.
Like they mate, but they can't produce fertile offspring.
They may and they can't produce fertile offspring? Sure. So they're really not even a species? Because by definition, you have to be able to produce. Or they have some kind of...
Isn't that like how mules can produce?
Right. So because they're like a hybrid, right? And hybrids can't mate. What do you think happened here? Give me an example. What's an explanation for this? Here's my original population, and then all of a sudden that happened.
I would maybe pollination, like it create
Good.
Like it led to a new species.
I love it. And in my period A, somebody mentioned the fact that animals can bring seeds on their fur, hence creating a whole new population. So think of those things. Don't just always think of mating. Another good one is any kind of chemical or environmental condition that could kind of wipe out a little. So don't think of population only forming. It could be the opposite. The loss of a population can also be sympatric or allopatric, right? Which basically leads to loss of a species. So it's not always the development of a new one. All right, genetic drift or bottleneck effect. Did you hear about this in bio? Yeah.
Why does it sound so familiar?
Yeah, because evolution is the last thing you study in bio freshman year, if you get there. And in AP bio, it's a big chunk of it. So, yeah. So, genetic drift and bottleneck effect describes what? What's happening to my population? Here's the original, and then this happens. Let's stop here. Let's try to describe this. What's happening? What's happening to my original population? It's shrinking. There's literally going to be a sharp reduction in the size of the population of a specific maybe species, which in this case is the yellow, right? And then over time, the population of blue evolves and dominates that area, right? Because there's more of them to create more of them. Good example of this is cheetah and the elephant walrus due to overhunting, because this happens because of human activities and environmental conditions. We know that humans have impacted a lot of these things immensely, and this being one that's strictly human activity.
Do dolphins have bottleneck effect?
So the founder effect is when, and by the way, both of these involve genetic drift. Like everything, your genes are impacted first, then the species changes, right? Okay. Founder effect, what's happening? Here's my original population, and then something happens, and then
The species dies out.
it can be that the species dies out. That's one way of explaining it, but really, we don't really know that. All we know is this. So what's this describing?
It's
Could be, too. It could be based. So we're not really describing why. I'm asking you what's happening, right? I'm glad that you're thinking of what are possible scenarios to describe why this happened. But what is happening in this diagram?
So the population that is like less,
So what can we say about this?
like their like
Natural selection. The white one,
yeah,
the equal,
like their traits.
and now the red one has more, like, there's just more population, so they can,
So here's the population, here's this. All that's happening, guys, is they're starting their own little group. It's like saying, I take the girls and we move and we have period C girl population and period, yeah. We left the original population, which was larger and had more diversity, and left and formed our own, which is not good because genetically we're less diverse and we're changing allele frequency, which can actually lead to a whole new species development. Because that's what and finches is an example of this, believe it or not, which is Darwin, and it's an example of a lot of things that we're going to cover today. So we have not done this slide. I know my other class did, but this is natural selection. Now let me check. All right, so types of evolution. We're going to learn about a different, and this is obviously stuff you know. When you think of the word natural selection, what's a word that automatically comes to your mind? Elimination? Really? Of another species. You think of competition. I'm going to give you that. Let's do competition right here. Whoops, I meant right here. Maybe that. Right here. Not even. Competition, I swear, happens because if you're overpopulated and their environment has limited resources, organisms will compete. Or they can die. Or they can migrate. But this slide is talking about how organisms can evolve. Hence natural selection, because the organism or the species is naturally selected based on some gene that they carry to favor the environment, okay? So they have some favorable trait that's an advantage over others, and hence they can survive and reproduce, and the population evolves, okay? But when you see the word natural selection, nobody has a phrase that automatically pops up into their head?
survival of the fittest.
Thank you. So you're going to write the word survival of the fittest. And then I want you to describe that word fittest for me.
With
like the craftiest,
Craftiest. What else?
With
superior
advantages.
What?
Advantages.
Advantageous. That's the word I want you to write. Favorable trait is the definition of fittest. Because in your mind, and I'm glad none of you said that, fit means strength, health, right? Stamina, but that's not necessarily always the favorable trait. So you're going to put survival of the fittest, underline the word fittest, and in parentheses, favorable trait. So we're describing that. Also remember that you have to have variation. I can't stress that enough. Within the population for this to take place. So competition will happen, but because there's variation, the organism with the favorable trait to compete for that specific resource will be selected by the environment, will reproduce, and the population will evolve, right? If you don't have the favorable trait, you might not make it.